Have you ever asked yourself why the nice guy always finishes last? Why the ones who stay up late to listen, who bring her flowers, who answer every message within minutes, are the same ones who get ghosted, ignored, forgotten? While the man who doesn't text back, who keeps her uncertain, who doesn't try at all, somehow becomes the one she can't stop thinking about. It's not that you're doing something wrong in the moral sense. You're doing everything right. And that's exactly the problem. You think love is a moral equation. Be kind, be reliable, be generous, and you'll be chosen. But love doesn't work like that. Attraction doesn't work like that. Women don't work like that. Because what you're calling love is, at its root, a survival algorithm. It's not evil, it's not manipulative, it's evolutionary code, hundreds of thousands of years old, running silently underneath everything. While you're talking about feelings, her nervous system is doing calculus. Is this man high enough status to protect me? Does he have the confidence to survive under pressure? Do other women want him? Could he walk away from me if he had to? Not one of these questions is asked out loud. She doesn't even know she's asking them, but her body does. Her unconscious does. And before you've even finished your drink, she's already made a judgment, not about your soul, but about your viability. This is the part no one tells you, that attraction isn't a choice, that it doesn't respond to niceness or effort or intention. It responds to tension, to uncertainty, to scarcity, to dominance, not in the aggressive sense, but in the social, biological, and emotional sense. You walk in trying to show her how safe you are, how supportive, how sweet. She sees it as predictable, transparent, unthreatening, which in evolutionary terms means low risk, but also low reward. Her instincts aren't looking for someone who's easy to manage. They're looking for someone she can't quite figure out. Someone who doesn't chase because he doesn't need to. Someone whose presence suggests self-sufficiency, not arrogance, not cruelty, just non-need. Because here's the truth you were never told. Need is the most unattractive force in nature, especially when it's directed upward, when it's the man needing the woman more than she needs him. You were taught to believe the opposite, that giving more, caring more, proving yourself more would win her over. You were raised on stories where effort equals love, but those stories were lies. They were designed to keep you obedient, not empowered. Jung once said, "We don't fall in love with people, we fall in love with our projections." And that's where it gets darker. Because while you're projecting meaning onto her, she's scanning you with ancient, unconscious filters you don't even know exist. This isn't romantic, it's biological. It's not a fairy tale, it's a pattern. And Schopenhauer saw it for what it was. Not a spiritual bond, not destiny, not a merging of souls, but a reproductive illusion. A trick of nature designed to make you give everything for a fleeting chemical high, so the species can continue. You feel like you're falling in love, but what's really happening is that your DNA is pushing you toward traits that signal reproductive advantage. And hers is doing the same, only hers is far more selective, far more hidden, and far more powerful. You're playing a game of performance. She's running a filter. You're imagining a connection, she's measuring value. And not moral value, biological value, which is why you keep getting left behind. Not because you're bad, but because you're visible, obvious, over-evangelible. And her instincts are wired for something else, something that feels just out of reach. That's why when you finally get her, she loses interest. Why the chase ends with silence? Because the moment you become certain, she becomes bored. You weren't chosen, you were acquired. And acquisition kills tension. It's not her fault, it's not your fault. It's just what nature wants. And what it wants has nothing to do with your feelings. The man she craves isn't the one who explains himself, proves himself, offers everything. It's the one who withholds slightly, who maintains his own gravity, who can walk away and mean it. You'll notice something when you pay close attention. The men who don't care whether she stays or leaves, they're the ones who command her attention, not because they're playing games, but because their value is internal, independent, scarce. That's what triggers her biology, not your poetry, not your patience, not your promises, scarcity, mystery, competence, and yes, strength. Not the kind that lifts weights, but the kind that doesn't collapse under pressure. The kind that makes no woman the center of his universe, no matter how beautiful she is. That kind of man changes the way a woman breathes around him. That kind of man rewires her nervous system. And she'll never explain why, because she can't. It's not explainable. It's primal. So while you're wondering what you said wrong, what you could have done better, she's already moved on. Not out of cruelty, but because her nervous system found a stronger signal. You never had a chance. Not because you weren't good, but because you didn't understand what the game was. You thought this was about emotion, but it's about instinct. You thought this was about fairness, but it's about selection. You thought she saw you, but she only scanned you, and the algorithm said, too familiar, too safe, too easy to understand. You thought you were playing chess. She was watching you from the sky, already 5 moves ahead. This is why you keep reliving the same story, where your loyalty gets punished, your sensitivity gets overlooked, and your devotion gets you demoted to just a friend. It's not a bug in the system. It is the system, and until you see it for what it is, you'll keep losing while doing everything right. Schopenhauer said it clearly, love is not what we think it is. It's not a reward, it's a trap. Not because she's the villain, but because biology is indifferent. It just wants replication. And when the replication has occurred, or the illusion breaks, nature moves on. That ache in your chest, that emptiness after she leaves, that confusion, that wasn't betrayal. That was programming expiring. And now you're alone, blaming yourself when all that happened was selection. So here's the hard truth. You didn't lose because you weren't worthy. You lost because she never truly saw you. She saw a pattern. She ran the numbers and quietly, without cruelty, decided you weren't it. Because in the cold logic of attraction, being good is not the same as being chosen. And the ones who get chosen, they don't try. They don't ask for permission. They don't explain themselves. They simply are. You thought you were building something real, but she was scanning for fit. You thought you were winning her heart, but you were just passing through a filter. And that's the part that stings the most. Not that she didn't love you, but that you never even reached the part of her that could. Because for her, it wasn't personal. It was biological. And you were predictable. Predictability is safe. Safe is boring. Boring is unselectable. You didn't fail. You were filtered. You weren't rejected. You were scanned. You weren't ignored. You were obvious. And she moved on without a second thought. Because her nervous system was never moved to begin with. You thought you were building a connection, but really, you were showing your hand too early. And she wasn't playing cards. She was running code. So here it is, the truth no one ever said out loud. You didn't win her heart. You triggered her algorithm. Or you didn't. And that changes everything. You thought she was undecided. You thought her silence meant uncertainty. Her hot and cold behavior meant inner conflict. Her distance meant she was confused. But that's because you still believe her emotions are reactions. They're not. They're strategies. What looks like hesitation is often just execution, a calculated unfolding of a decision already made. You misread her stillness as indecision, when in reality she was watching you betray your own position. You thought her crying meant vulnerability, that her withdrawal meant she needed more reassurance, that her aloofness meant she needed more of your effort, your presence, your sacrifice. But none of that was true. The truth is, her behavior is a test, not a plea. And every time you responded with more softness, more certainty, more emotional availability, you failed. Not because softness is bad, but because it was offered too early, too cheaply, too obviously. And for the male nervous system, rejection feels like injustice. But for her biology, your neediness feels like confirmation. Confirmation that she has the upper hand. Confirmation that she doesn't need to invest. Confirmation that your worth is tied to her gaze. And the moment you gave her that confirmation was the moment she stopped truly feeling you. She may still have slept with you. She may still have posted photos with you. She may still have said she needed space. But her nervous system had already moved on. Her body may have been beside you, but her instincts were already scanning elsewhere. She had already made the shift, and you never saw it. Because you thought love was linear, that it starts with interest, grows with intimacy, and sustains with effort. But her love doesn't work that way. It moves in loops, in bursts, in psychological weather patterns. And unless you learn to read the storms, you'll keep standing in the rain thinking your umbrella is working. You'll keep explaining yourself to a silence that has already tuned you out. Because in her world, value is determined by scarcity. Scarcity of attention, scarcity of availability, scarcity of emotional certainty. And when you offer too much too soon, you flood the system. You drown the mystery, you suffocate the tension. She pulls away not because you're bad, but because she can now predict you. And what's predictable is unworthy of submission. You see, her biology isn't searching for a soulmate, it's searching for structure, for containment, for something stronger than itself. And when your emotional energy revolves around her, she becomes the structure. You become the orbit, and she loses respect. Not consciously, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. Her instincts are wired for strength, not just physical strength, but emotional dominance, social presence, frame control, the ability to remain unmoved in the face of emotional chaos. You lose that, she loses interest. And it happens fast, sometimes in a single moment, a single concession, a single, okay, we'll do it your way, said too soon. And she smiles, she says thank you. She even kisses you. But inside, something collapses, something irreversible. Because the minute you surrendered your position to please her, you revealed that your center depends on her approval. And that's when she starts to drift. You think you're gaining her trust. You're actually dissolving your attraction. You think you're showing love. You're showing weakness. You think you're proving commitment. You're proving dependence. And she begins to test you, subtly, relentlessly. She changes plans last minute to see if you bend. She withholds affection to measure your reaction. She creates conflict just to observe your frame. And you, thinking this is a relationship challenge, respond with more investment, more reassurance, more surrender. And the more you give, the less she feels. Because here's the brutal truth. Her nervous system isn't built to trust men who cave. It's built to trust men who hold, who maintain center, who don't react to her storms but anchor them. And every time you shift your values to accommodate her feelings, she feels less safe, not more. She doesn't want control. She wants containment. She doesn't want to lead. She wants to test whether you're worthy of leading. And if you keep failing those tests, if you keep softening in the face of emotional pressure, she doesn't hate you. She outgrows you. This is the quiet heartbreak men don't understand. You didn't cheat. You didn't lie. You didn't stop loving her. You just stopped being the mountain. And she can't love what she has to carry. So she begins to detach. She begins to create distance. And you feel it. So you close the gap. You reach for her harder. You over-communicate. You offer more. And the more you do, the colder she becomes. Until the relationship becomes a performance. You acting as the version of yourself you think she wants. Her acting as if she still believes it. But underneath it all, she already left. You just didn't notice because you thought the collapse would come with screaming, with cheating, with obvious betrayal. You didn't realize that women often leave in silence, not because they're passive, but because their departure is biological. By the time she tells you she's confused, she's already 80% gone. By the time she says she needs space, she's already rehearsed her exit. By the time she says, it's not you, it's me, the algorithm has long since filtered you out, and you never saw it coming. Because her withdrawal looked like confusion. You mistook the test for a cry for help, but she wasn't asking for help. She was measuring your frame, and you gave it up. Not once, but consistently, softly, gradually, until she couldn't feel you anymore. Until she had nothing left to submit to. Because when a woman can move you too easily, she doesn't trust your leadership. When she sees you orbit her needs, she doesn't believe you can handle life's. When she watches you trade your power for her comfort, she may thank you, but her instincts mourn you. Because biologically, her security depends on your stability. And if your stability depends on her, she can't rest. So she leaves. not because she wanted better, but because her nervous system demanded it. And now you're sitting alone wondering how it all changed. It changed when you gave up your center, when you broke your own values to keep her happy. When you said yes when you should have said no. When you asked for permission to be enough. That's when she stopped feeling you, not because you were weak, but because you stopped being the mountain. You became the valley. You became soft ground. And while she may have appreciated it consciously, her biology punished you for it. Because attraction isn't kindness. It's polarity, it's structure. It's who bends first and who never bends at all. And no matter how much she says she wants equality, she still tests for leadership. No matter how modern she claims to be, her biology is ancient, and it whispers to her when your spine starts to dissolve. So now you know. The silence wasn't hesitation. The games weren't confusion. The hot and cold wasn't immaturity. It was strategy. Ancient, brutal, instinctive. It wasn't personal, it was a sorting mechanism, and you were sorted the moment you flinched. You were filtered the moment you said yes when you should have walked. She didn't leave because you weren't enough. She left because you proved you needed her to be. And that is when her decision was made. Long before the breakup, long before the last argument, long before you saw it coming, she chose the moment you abandoned yourself. The moment you gave her what she hadn't earned, the moment you shifted your orbit around hers, and she never looked back. Because for her, it was never a debate, never a question, never a maybe. It was biology. And biology doesn't wait for clarity. Biology moves, quickly, quietly, permanently. And by the time you realized what happened, it was already done. So here's what you need to remember. Her choice didn't happen in the relationship. It happened the moment you gave away your frame. And from that moment on, nothing you said, did, or gave ever truly mattered again. You thought this was love. You thought she saw you, not your car, not your paycheck, not your body. You thought she loved your presence, your patience, your effort. And maybe at first she did, or at least it looked that way. But what if I told you that the feelings you called love were just signals, temporarily firing in response to your perceived value? Not your character, not your truth, but your position in the hierarchy, your advantage in the field. The way her nervous system calculated your worth based on what you could offer, not just materially, but biologically. Not because she's cold, but because nature is. Because you weren't evaluated as a soul, you were scanned as an asset, an instinctual equation solving for safety, security, elevation. You thought her eyes lit up because of who you were, but it might have been because of what you represented. And when that representation shifted, when your confidence cracked, your status declined, your edge softened, her instincts shifted too. Quietly, invisibly, permanently. You didn't notice it at first. You just felt her become distant, more polite, less hungry, less available. And you started trying harder, thinking this was a phase, thinking she was stressed, distracted, confused. But the truth is, she was adapting, not to your emotions, but to your drop in biological value. Not because she stopped loving you, but because her love was never about you. It was about what you symbolized when you were at your peak. You see, we've romanticized a lie. The lie that love is unconditional, that when it's real, it stays. That when someone loves you, they love all of you, always. But biology doesn't work that way. Evolution doesn't care about fairy tales. It cares about efficiency. And efficiency means filtering out weakness, upgrading when necessary, and abandoning systems that no longer offer an advantage. She didn't betray you. She updated her assessment. She didn't fall out of love. She recalibrated based on data her nervous system received, signals you weren't even aware you were sending. Maybe you lost your job. Maybe you stopped leading. Maybe you became too emotionally available, too stable, too predictable. And her instinct said, this system is no longer optimal. The illusion shattered, the thrill evaporated, the scarcity vanished. And she moved on, not loudly, not dramatically, just silently, elegantly, efficiently, and you were left there wondering what happened. What happened is that her perception of your value changed, and her love, if we dare still call it that, was never for the core of you. It was for the sum total of what you could offer. And when that equation no longer favored her long-term instincts, the feeling disappeared. That's the part that breaks you, not that she left, but that she left without a struggle, without a breakdown, without a moment of real resistance. Because for her, it wasn't heartbreak. It was a biological pivot, and no amount of conversation, apology, or nostalgia could reverse it. Because the decision wasn't rational, it was evolutionary. And this is where the myth of true love collapses. You were taught that love is about who you are, that if someone really sees you, they stay, they fight, they adapt with you. But no one told you about selection, about mating strategy, about the subconscious criteria her instincts were constantly measuring: your edge, your ambition, your positioning, your mystery, your social dominance. You were taught to win her through goodness, but she wasn't looking for goodness. She was looking for advantage, and when that advantage disappeared, so did her affection. It wasn't cruelty, it was calculation. One she didn't even know she was making. This is why you can pour yourself into a woman, give her everything, protect her, invest in her, and still get left for someone who gives her none of it. Because he triggers something you don't: the perception of upward movement, the sense of unpredictability, the signal of strength not yet tamed. And those are the signals her unconscious reads as worth submitting to. Your kindness, beautiful, admirable, but unless it's built on top of power, it's irrelevant. It doesn't register, it doesn't activate her core drive. That's why she may have loved you once and still left. Why she may have cried for you and still detached. Why she may have meant every word and still walked away. Because her tears weren't a contradiction, they were a release, a shedding, a signal that the evaluation had ended, and the result was no. She's not shallow, she's not manipulative, she's optimized. Optimized by evolution to seek the best possible outcome for herself and her offspring. And if you no longer signal that outcome, she doesn't argue with her instincts, she obeys them. That's not love, that's design. And the more you beg, plead, explain, prove, you only further confirm that she made the right choice. Because in her world, high-value men don't chase what's leaving, they replace what's drifting. They don't lower themselves to be understood. They elevate themselves to be re-evaluated. But you weren't taught that. You were taught to show up, to try harder, to be better. And all it did was make you easier to leave. Because effort alone doesn't build attraction. Value does. Status does. Scarcity does. And value, to her biology, isn't a stable trait. It fluctuates. It's alive. It's moment to moment. You can be everything she ever wanted one month and be invisible the next. Not because you changed dramatically, but because her filters adjusted, her needs updated, her instincts recalibrated. And if you were depending on her validation to stay afloat, you drowned. Because you were never loved, you were selected. And the selection was always conditional. You want to know why your love wasn't enough? Because love isn't what she was looking for. She was looking for certainty, for advantage, for leverage. She was looking for the man who wouldn't change when she tested him, who wouldn't flinch when she withheld, who wouldn't collapse when she pulled back. She was looking for the man who didn't need her love to be himself. And if that wasn't you, then no amount of love you gave her ever really mattered, because it was never about the love. It was about the leverage, the edge, the evolutionary edge. And when that disappeared, so did everything else. And you can call that heartbreak or betrayal, but it was neither. It was the system working exactly as it was designed, efficiently, mercilessly, honestly. So now you sit there wondering if she ever loved you. And maybe the better question is, did she ever see you at all? Or was she only ever seeing the traits that gave her an advantage, the ones that made her feel secure or elevated or superior? Because if her love vanished the moment you slipped, was it love? And if her love strengthened when you were thriving, was it about you or about what you gave her access to? And if she left not with hate, not even with anger, but with indifference, Was it a breakup? Or was it a transition? From one source to another, from one utility to the next. If she loved your position, but not your essence, did she really love you? And if she stayed only as long as you were winning, was she ever really with you? Or just with the spoils of your momentum? The truth is, what you thought was love was a scan, a sorting, a strategic alignment. She didn't fall in love. She fell into advantage, and when the advantage faded, so did her desire. It wasn't betrayal, it was biology. And biology doesn't apologize, it selects. And that is what you mistook for love. You thought you were the victim. You thought all you ever did was love too hard, try too much, stay too long. You told yourself she used you. She took advantage of your kindness. She broke your heart. And maybe she did. But here's the part you haven't faced yet. You helped her do it. You co-authored the script. You signed the contract. You handed her the pen. Not because you're weak, but because you were taught that love means giving everything, that to be chosen, you must earn it, prove it, bleed for it. You believed that if you sacrificed enough, if you stayed patient, if you made her the center of your world, she'd eventually turn around and love you back the way you needed. But she didn't. She never had to. Because the moment you made her the prize, you made yourself the worker, the chaser, the one waiting for approval. And nature doesn't reward those who wait. It rewards those who walk. Every time you stayed when she disrespected you. Every time you said it's okay when your needs were ignored. Every time you convinced yourself she just needed more time, more healing, more love. You weren't being loyal. You were being complicit. You were giving her the blueprint for how to treat you, and she followed it. Not because she's evil, but because people adapt to what we allow. She pulled, you followed. She withdrew, you leaned in. She gave less, you gave more. Until she realized something you refused to see. You were more afraid of losing her than she was of losing you. And that imbalance isn't romantic, it's repulsive. At a certain point, your commitment stops feeling noble and starts feeling desperate. Your consistency stops feeling strong and starts feeling spineless. You call it love, but it's not. It's dependency. It's the internalized belief that your worth is tied to being needed. And in that story, you don't show up as a man. You show up as a service, a strategy, a standby system she can use when the ones she truly desires don't work out. Look at your patterns. The late nights answering calls just to be her emotional support while she's sleeping with someone else. The gifts you give, not because they're wanted, but because you're terrified of being replaced. The apologies you make when she's the one who crossed the line. You're not being kind, you're being controllable. You're not being understanding, you're being edited. And every time you compromise a piece of your core just to keep her close, she feels it. Not in a way that makes her grateful, but in a way that makes her sure she can do better. Because here's what no one tells you. When a woman realizes you've shaped your entire self around her moods, her needs, her vision, she may thank you, but she'll never want you. She may keep you, but only in a role, not as a partner, as a provider, as a placeholder, as a man who's easier to manage than to desire. And the tragedy is, you put yourself there, out of fear, out of fantasy, out of a cultural conditioning that told you if you're good enough, you'll be chosen. But what if that's the lie? What if it's not about being good at all? What if it's about being full? Full enough to walk away when your value is questioned. Full enough to say no when your boundaries are tested. Full enough to stop trying to be loved and start choosing yourself before anyone else does. Because the problem isn't that she left. The problem is you stayed long after the dynamic had already turned against you. You stayed when the respect disappeared, when your effort stopped mattering, when you became predictable, pliable, pre-approved. You gave and gave, thinking you were being the hero, but in her eyes you were just removing the need to earn you. And no one values what they don't have to earn, especially not in the evolutionary logic of attraction. You thought she would appreciate your sacrifice. She interpreted it as self-erasure. You thought your presence was proving loyalty. She saw it as proof of submission. And her instincts rejected it, not out of cruelty, out of coding. Because deep down, her biology is asking one question: can he hold his frame when I test it? And you, with all your love and openness, failed. Not because you're not enough, but because you thought love meant abandoning yourself, because you believed being needed was the same as being wanted, because you confused emotional servitude with partnership. You thought being soft made you strong, but softness without structure doesn't create safety. It creates suffocation. You stopped leading, you started orbiting, and she felt it. She may have even cried about it. She may have told her friends how nice you were, how she wished she could love you more, but she couldn't, not because of what you lacked, but because of what you gave away, your edge, your mystery, your sovereignty. You weren't betrayed, you were filtered. You weren't mistreated, you were misaligned. You were still playing by the rules of a game that no longer exists, a game that says, be nice and you'll be chosen. Be patient and they'll come around. Give more and it'll eventually be enough. But modern dynamics don't reward infinite giving. They exploit it, they exhaust it, and then they discard it for someone who doesn't even try. Not because that person is better, but because they're unpredictable. They're unbothered. They're not running the same outdated script. The one you inherited from movies, parents, sermons, and sitcoms. The one that says you'll earn love through self-sacrifice. But love doesn't work that way, not anymore. Maybe not ever. You're not a victim of her choices. You're a product of your own, of the story you keep telling yourself about what a man is supposed to be. And until you burn that script, until you step out of the role and start reclaiming the author's chair, you'll keep attracting the same story, where you give too much, receive too little, and confuse being used with being needed. So what now? You stop chasing validation from a system designed to test your self-worth. You stop hoping to be seen by someone whose instinct is to scan. You stop expecting fulfillment from a game that was never built for you to win, and you begin the real work, the inner reprogramming, the identity reconstruction, the quiet withdrawal from every version of masculinity that taught you to shrink for love. Because here's the truth. You're not a failure. You're just outdated. You're not broken. You're running an old operating system. You're not unloved. You're unchosen because you're too available, too molded, too agreeable. And until you start loving from fullness instead of fear, your story will never change. She didn't break you. You broke your own spine trying to hold her world together. But the world you really need to hold is your own. And when you do, everything changes. Not instantly, not dramatically, but slowly, steadily, permanently. And one day you'll look back, not with hatred, but with clarity, not asking, why did she do this to me? But why did I help her do it? And that's when you'll understand. You weren't her victim. You were her mirror. You reflected back the exact dynamic she expected. You played the part she silently wrote. And when the story ended, it wasn't a tragedy. It was a reveal. You weren't abandoned. You were cooperating with your own defeat. And once you see that, you'll never be the same again, because you'll realize something most men never do. You weren't discarded, you were miscast. And it's time to walk off that stage before the next act begins, because you're not a failure. You've tried everything. You've listened. You've adjusted. You've opened up. You've sacrificed. You've made her your mirror, your compass, your reward, and you lost. But not because she won, because the game was never about her. It never was. You just didn't know it yet. That's what real awakening feels like. Not a scream of rebellion, but the silence that comes after you've been shattered. Not a war against women, but a reclamation of the self that you handed away. You were never meant to win her. You were meant to remember you, because this isn't about proving anything to her anymore. It's about reclaiming something from within, something older than romance, deeper than status, stronger than attraction, your sovereignty. Not the loud kind, not performative defiance, but the quiet, non-negotiable sense of authorship over your own life. And to do that, you have to rebuild. Not your body, not your strategy, your core. Piece by piece. Economic sovereignty. The kind of freedom that doesn't check another person's calendar to survive. The kind that doesn't fear being alone because solitude doesn't threaten your survival. A man who controls his income controls his direction. He's not baited by promises or punished by silence. He walks where he wants because no one is holding the leash of his livelihood. That's not ambition, it's freedom, philosophical sovereignty, the discipline to think beyond what culture has told you is attractive, to unlearn the idea that romantic success is the measure of your worth, to stop asking, what do they want from me, and start asking, what do I stand for, with or without them? It's not about hating women. It's about no longer outsourcing your belief system to impress them. It's about rejecting the script completely, even the part that says you need to win, and then physical sovereignty, not about muscles, not about aesthetics, but about will, about owning your time, about putting your phone down and getting your hands back on the wheel, the strength to walk away, the clarity to say no, the self-respect to stop performing in relationships you've already outgrown, to no longer beg for a place in her world when yours is still waiting to be built. This is the real shift. When you stop showing up with need and start radiating value, not the kind you announce, the kind you become, the kind that speaks in posture, in pace, in silence, where you're no longer trying to win her back, but to win your time back, your clarity back, your voice back. You stop being a man who seeks approval and start becoming a field of gravity, and she either resonates with it or she doesn't. But that's not the point anymore, because she's not the goal. You are. You begin to understand that a woman cannot complete you, and if she does, it means you were incomplete to begin with. So you stop asking for completion and start building capacity. You stop looking for a perfect match and start becoming a better filter. You stop waiting for connection and start creating alignment. She's not your home, she's your visitor, and she stays only if the energy remains mutual, only if the structure holds, only if the value flows both ways. You stop asking, is she the one, and start asking, does she deepen my freedom? You stop chasing intensity and start choosing consistency. You stop fearing loneliness and start befriending it, because here's the secret. The most magnetic men are not the ones who need nothing. They're the ones who don't trade themselves for anything. You are not here to be needed. You are here to be whole. And when you are whole, your love becomes a gift, not a demand. A reflection of your overflow, not your emptiness. That's what makes it powerful. That's what makes it trustworthy. And that's the paradox. Only when you stop using love to fill a hole can you truly offer it. You begin to see solitude not as exile, but as sovereignty. Silence not as absence, but as presence. You begin to realize that freedom is not the absence of relationships, it's the absence of dependency, it's the absence of unconscious submission, it's the presence of choice. And no, this isn't a story where you become so detached that nothing matters. This isn't emotional numbing, this is precision. This is knowing exactly what you'll give and exactly what you'll never give again. This is walking into love without collapsing, staying in love without shrinking, leaving love without guilt, because you finally understand the difference between connection and captivity, between chemistry and codependency, between romance and role-playing. You no longer ask someone to make you feel like a man, you just are, with or without applause, with or without attention, with or without her. And that's when it happens, the shift. Not outside, within. You stop trying to be loved and start being loving. You stop trying to be desired and start being directional. You stop playing roles and start embodying truth. And the women who meet you there, they don't need to be won. They don't need to be tamed. They walk with you because they want to, because they can feel your frame, not as a cage, but as a force. And for the first time, you're not afraid of losing them because you're no longer afraid of being with yourself. You realize that love isn't something you extract, it's something you share. And the only men who can share it fully are the ones who don't need it to feel complete. So you stop seeking, you stop pleading, you stop performing, you rise, not in rebellion, but in return. A return to the self you buried under compromise. A return to the clarity you gave up for comfort. A return to the mission that never needed approval in the first place. And when you do, when you rise in that kind of sovereignty, everything changes. Not because you win her, but because you finally win you. And no woman, no rejection, no silence, no loss can take that away from you again. Because when you no longer define yourself by love, you finally have the strength to be loved. If this message resonated with you, if you felt seen, if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it. Leave a comment, tell me where you are on your journey, and if you're ready to reclaim your story, hit subscribe, because this conversation, it's just getting started.